Hi, parents, and welcome back. Today, I have a special guest that asked not to share his name, but have a very powerful story that I really want to share with all of you as a parent. I think it was very beneficial for me to hear his story, and I hope it will provide value to you as well. So, my first question is, when did you realize that you have a problem?
Tough question to answer. There is an evolution of understanding around this issue. Probably the first time that well, for one thing, I was hiding it. When I was 13, I called a phone sex line a number of times, a whole bunch of times, to where like I charged like $300 on my parents' phone bill, and this was like in 1991 or something, and got caught. I mean, it became clear that I was the perpetrator, and there was an immense amount of shame around that. And my parents, I have to say, contributed to that sense of shame. I was unable to stop, and I remember as a kid bargaining with God and making resolutions and bargaining with God. I think that's evidence that I had a problem. There's other examples too. As I got older, I used to buy pornography. I used to pay for it, online and stuff. And I remember back in college, like one of my login names or passwords or whatever was porn addict. So that's obviously an acknowledgement that I had an addiction. And there's of course, this great ambivalence, this great, like, very strong compulsion and desire, and also like a disgust, a hatred of it, which I think is present, is a telltale sign of addiction. And then, I think at 25 or so, I approached someone who was in AA on a number of occasions for help, but I wasn't able to actually tell him what the issue was. I just kind of like chickened out every time I started talking about it because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that this was a thing. It was kind of my own dark secret. I didn't have any information or any kind of knowledge of it at all. And it seemed that the acknowledgement of it, even to myself on a certain level, was the acknowledgement that terrible human being.
Like, what would you get out of it?
Throughout my life, I've had a lot of difficulty, concentrating, paying attention. I've often kind of like blamed my faulty memory, like that I can't remember this, I can't remember that, like losing stuff, forgetting stuff. But I remember every second of every clip of pornography I've ever watched. Like I know it, and it's seared into my brain. And if I see it again 10 years later, I remember that I've watched it. It effortlessly allowed me to just be completely absorbed and forget everything else that was going on around me. All of my fears and insecurities and stress and unhappiness. I was totally locked in and absorbed. Anyway, what I got out of it was an escape, a fantasy world where I was in control, and there was like fantasy world of my own creation and my own making that I had control over.
And what would you say are the consequences for you in being porn addict?
I think what's become clear to me lately is that the biggest consequence is a lack of confidence, a loss of faith in myself, because I was very internally conflicted about these behaviors, an enormous pull on me, and I was not able to stop. And I think that it really caused me to lose faith in myself. It led me to self-pity and resentment. It led me to a storyline to find a scapegoat for my answers. And so I dwelled in self-pity for a long time because the scapegoat had to be, or I learned it to be, my parents, my early experiences and stuff like that. And the irony is that there was abuse and neglect and terrible things that were handled very badly and all that stuff. But I clung to that as like a lifeboat. That became my story, the explanation why for my dysfunction. And I didn't realize that I was stuck in this kind of like morass of self pity. So it really led to a very low place. But to name one thing, yeah, just lack of faith in myself.
I heard many times that they say that the way to know someone is addicted is because they don't do other things. They only want to do what they are addicted to. Looking back, were you actually putting aside other things and give more power to pornography?
Yeah, it became the kind of it. Well, I would say it had a displaced importance in my life, like an outsized importance to my life. I looked to it for comfort. I looked to it when I wanted to celebrate, and I didn't learn to deal with life on life's terms. I looked to this to medicate.
When you realized all that, what did you do?
Well, it wasn't an aha moment. It's been an evolution, and I had to, through the help of this recovery program, I became aware that I had this problem. It was an addiction because like I was doing things that were against my morals. I was doing things that were secretive, and it got worse and worse, and the behaviors got worse. I was continually moving the goalpost, in terms of what was acceptable behavior. And that left me feeling really shitty and low. And then I reached out for help, and then by working a program of recovery, by going to therapy, by reading books and literature, like I began to kind of like not just to make headway on reducing the behaviors, but also putting positive things into my life that were previously absent that I didn't know. Like I didn't really learn to take very good care of myself as a kid, and I didn't know that like doing things that make you happy is really important for your health. Like I didn't think I deserved to be happy, stuff like that. So I had to learn to like put positive things in.
Can you give an example for something like positive that you learn to give yourself?
Yeah, I'll give you a specific example. For a while, like a few years ago, I recognized that I was doing all of this should and supposed to, and I was like just spinning my wheels and still unhappy and didn't know what the hell to do and all this stuff. And I just realized, I was like, well, what's going to make me happy? What do I know is going to make me happy that like, it's not like somebody telling me, it's not like it's supposed to, because again, like I lived so many years like this. What do I know that I really makes me happy? And I knew, and I realized like, I love dogs. Like I love animals, and I love having a dog. They give me so much joy. So I was like, I'm going to get a dog. It was definitely like a step forward, because then I had this kind of aspect of joy in my life, and almost imperceptibly, it really lifted me.
That's beautiful. Do you have shame or guilt of the things that you did?
It's dissipated. I have some. It's not completely gone, but it's dissipated quite a bit. I tell people sometimes when I first entered the rooms, the 12-step rooms of SAA, first of all, I was seeing a therapist. He advised me to go to these meetings. I didn't know anything about it. He kept saying, you need to get sober. You need to get sober. I'm like, I'm not a drunk. I don't drink. Like, what are you talking about? Like, are you listening? And, he was talking about sober from the pornography and sex addiction stuff. But so we would do a plan every week, and every week we would write it down. And every week the plan would be, okay, we're going to go to 2 meetings. Every week I would come back and he'd be like, do you go to meetings? And I'd be like, nope. So finally I went to this meeting, and it was horrible. It was like a Saturday Night Live skit of like a sex meeting, sex addict meeting. Like everyone looked like shit. Like it was just this old creepy dudes. It was in the basement of this church, and I was like, oh God, get me out of here. So it was terrible at first. And even for a while after that, for I would say more than a year after that, 2 years maybe, people were hugging each other. And I was like, I am not hugging you. Do not come near me. Like, I am not a hugger. This is where I was. You know what I mean? This was my karma. Like I was extremely guarded, closed off. Don't touch me. Just all of this extremely guarded, closed off behavior. That was historical for me. Over time, the walls started to crack, and just, continuing going to meetings, continuing to try to make an effort, even though I didn't give myself credit for it much of the time. I was making an effort, going to meetings, going to therapy, sharing about my experience. Do I continue to feel shame? A lot less. I I didn't know people. You know, I have an intimacy disorder. I didn't know that it was okay to be flawed. I didn't know that it was okay to have imperfections and to be human. I didn't know that. I thought I had to be perfect, otherwise I would get kicked to the curb. Over time, I've realized we all have flaws. I'm not a bad person because I did this, you know, and part of that understanding is doing this rigorous work of internal house cleaning, you know, making up for the things you've done wrong, admitting your mistakes to God and to your fellows.
Another question I want to ask you is when you're thinking, and if you're thinking of becoming a parent, what would you think you're going to do different with your son or daughter?
You know, I don't have children. I believe very deeply that I would be a very devoted father because the message that I received as a kid over and over again, it seemed, was like, you're nothing, you're not important. I'll be damned, you know, if my kid is going to feel that way. It will not, that is not going to happen to any kid of mine. Love and attention and listening and openness.
There are parents who are watching us and they have children and their children might be watching pornography. And it's not about saying that every person who watches pornography will become addict. So the question comes then, what would you advise the parent?
I would advise them to the greatest extent possible, limit the amount of pornography in the house, but also not allow it to become this secret, forbidden thing.
So you're a parent and your child is teenager, and then you realize that they watch pornography and you know you cannot limit them. What would you say?
Maybe I would tell them my own story about my use to some degree. I might tell them what's appropriate for that age, and maybe I wouldn't get into all these details, but I might consider telling them my own struggle with it.
I love that, you know, because I think this is super powerful. Sometimes we forget that we also been there in a specific way, and there is a way to share without sharing everything, because that's what really makes it powerful for them to listen. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say you're dealing with a very, very serious drug that's immediately available to your children. The click of a button. You have to be aware that this is not a small thing. Like, it can ruin lives. So you have to treat it very carefully. Even if it doesn't ruin their lives, it is dramatically influencing their sexual behavior and beyond that, their behavior towards other people, particularly, you know, for young boys, it's impacting how they're treating women.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with other parents. I really hope it was beneficial for everyone who listening. And if you have any questions you want me to forward, and then maybe we can have another session with answering those questions, feel free to reach out to me directly or ask in the comments, and I'm promising to address them.